In a quiet suburban neighborhood where the stars flicker like distant dreams, Jada Thompson, a 16-year-old girl with a fierce spirit and a determined gaze, sits at her cluttered desk, surrounded by a whirlwind of books and papers. The gentle hum of crickets fills the air, contrasting sharply with the turmoil in her heart. Outside her window, the street is bathed in the soft glow of lamplight, illuminating the well-kept lawns and the faint outlines of houses that seem to exude a false sense of security. But inside Jada's mind, shadows loom large. She's been battling not just the typical challenges of adolescence, but the weight of being a black girl in a predominantly white school, where prejudice and microaggressions linger like an unwelcome fog. Her father, Mr. Thompson, a dedicated FBI agent, is a figure of pride, yet his badge casts a long shadow, creating a constant reminder of the expectations placed upon her. As she writes in her journal, chronicling her thoughts on resilience and justice, Jada grapples with her identity, caught between the fierce legacy of her father's work and the insidious racism that seeks to undermine her at every turn. Tonight, as the world outside settles into a comforting silence, she feels an urgency deep within, a sense that tomorrow will force her to confront the realities of her life and the bullies that hide behind authority. The tension is palpable, a storm brewing just beneath the surface, as she steels herself for the battles to come. The following day dawns gray and overcast, mirroring the tension that churns in Jada's stomach as she makes her way to school. The familiar sights of the suburban landscape feel more daunting today, each house an echo of the judgment she fears awaits her. As she enters the high school, the buzz of students feels electric, charged with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The halls are alive with laughter and chatter, but for Jada, the laughter sounds like a taunt, a reminder of her isolation. She can hear snippets of conversations flitting by, words that slice through her resolve like glass. FBI girl, she thinks she's special, and what a loser. Each phrase hangs in the air, heavier than the oppressive clouds outside. In her first period class, Ms. Wilson, a teacher in her late 30s with an air of superiority and a sharp tongue, stands at the front, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk. She is known for her biting sarcasm and her penchant for targeting Jada, often using thinly veiled insults that feel personal. Today, Ms. Wilson is on the warpath. As she discusses the day's lesson on responsibility, her gaze zeroes in on Jada, and a smirk dances on her lips, like a predator eyeing its prey. Perhaps some of us need to learn the difference between respect and arrogance, she says, her voice dripping with disdain. The words land like stones, sending a ripple of snickers through the classroom. Jada feels her face flush, a mix of anger and humiliation rising in her throat. She glances at her classmates, some whispering behind their hands, others stealing glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and cruelty. The bell rings, and Jada bolts out of the room, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere, the laughter echoing in her ears. Outside, she finds a crowd gathered near the entrance, their voices rising in agitation. As she approaches, she sees Officers Logan and Brooks standing by a police car, their uniforms stark against the drab backdrop of the school. Logan, with his imposing stature, arms crossed and a permanent scowl etched into his features, barks orders at a group of students with an authority that feels both intimidating and unjust. Brooks, younger and more approachable, shifts uncomfortably, glancing between Logan and the students, a hint of hesitation in his eyes. "Back away! This isn't a joke!" Logan's voice cuts through the crowd like a whip. Jada's heart sinks as she recognizes Marcus, a friend from her neighborhood, standing with his hands raised, confusion and fear etched on his face. His usual easygoing demeanor is gone, replaced by an anxious energy that mirrors Jada's own racing pulse. "I was just asking what was going on," Marcus responds, his voice cracking slightly under the pressure. Logan's expression hardens, and he steps closer, invading Marcus's personal space, his tone dripping with condescension. "You think you can question me? You've got a lot of nerve, kid." The crowd grows tense, students exchanging worried glances, unsure of how to react. A surge of anger courses through Jada, igniting a fire within her. This isn't just an isolated incident. It's a blatant abuse of power, a pattern she knows all too well. The atmosphere is thick with tension as students gather, whispers of outrage circulating among them. Determined not to stand by, Jada steps forward, her voice rising above the crowd, steady and fierce. "That's not right. You can't treat him like that." Her words cut through the tension, and she feels the weight of her classmates' gazes shift towards her, their collective breath held in anticipation. Logan turns, surprise flashing in his eyes before it hardens into irritation, and the crowd watches, a mixture of support and apprehension swirling in the air. Jada squares her shoulders, ready to confront the very embodiment of authority that has so often been used against her and her friends. This moment, she realizes, is the spark that ignites her fight against the systemic injustices that have plagued her life for too long. The chanting reaches a fever pitch, reverberating through the halls of the school like a rallying cry. "Justice for Jada! Justice for Brooks!" The fervor of the students ignites a wave of emotion, and Jada feels her heart swell with pride and determination. They have transformed their fear into something powerful, a collective force that Logan can no longer ignore. But just as the moment feels like it's shifting in their favor, the atmosphere takes a dangerous turn. Logan, clearly rattled and losing control, shouts into the chaos. "You think this is a game? I'll make sure you regret this." His voice echoes, sharp and threatening, and the crowd recoils momentarily, a wave of unease washing over them. Jada locks eyes with Brooks, whose face is pale but resolute. "We can't let him intimidate us," she whispers, her heart racing. "We have to stay strong." Logan steps closer to the students, chest puffed out, as if trying to assert his authority through sheer intimidation. "You want justice?" he sneers, glancing at the crowd as if daring anyone to challenge him further. "You'll find out what happens when you disrespect an officer." At that moment, a heavy silence falls over the crowd, the gravity of his words sinking in. It feels as if time stands still, and Jada's stomach drops. There's a palpable shift in energy. Fear and anger collide as students exchange worried glances. "Don't back down," Marcus shouts, breaking the tension. "We have to stand up for ourselves. We're not afraid." Just then, the doors burst open, and a new group of officers enters, their presence commanding attention. Among them is Chief Harris, known for her strong stance on community relations and a history of advocating for transparency within the police force. Her arrival brings an unexpected jolt of hope, but Jada knows they must tread carefully. "What's happening here?" Chief Harris demands, her voice steady as she surveys the scene. "Just some kids trying to stir up trouble," Logan snaps, the defensiveness palpable in his tone. "They're out of control." Jada steps forward, heart pounding. "That's not true. We're trying to stand up against bullying and harassment." Her voice, though shaking, carries the weight of her conviction. "Logan pushed Brooks, and we're tired of being treated like we don't matter." The chief's eyes narrow, processing the chaotic scene in front of her. "Is this true, Logan?" "He's lying," Logan exclaims, frustration mounting in his voice. "They're making this all up because they don't like authority." "Let's not escalate this," Chief Harris interjects, her tone firm. "I want to hear from the students first. You will all get your chance to speak." The air feels electric as Jada watches the tension play out. Logan's demeanor shifts from defiance to desperation, the mounting pressure forcing cracks in his bravado. "Let's hear from Jada first," Chief Harris directs, motioning for her to come closer. Taking a deep breath, Jada steps up, feeling the weight of her classmates' eyes on her, a palpable mix of hope and anxiety swirling in the air. "I was just standing here with Brooks when Officer Logan came up to us," she begins, her voice steady despite the storm brewing within her. "We weren't doing anything wrong. He pushed Brooks when we tried to defend ourselves, and then he started yelling at us. This isn't about just one incident. It's about all the times we've been dismissed or bullied by authority." Her words spill out, urgent and raw, each syllable a challenge to the status quo. The crowd murmurs in agreement, their voices rising once more like the swell of a tide. "Yes, we matter," someone calls out, igniting a fire within the assembly. The chant begins again, but this time it's more focused, more determined. "We matter! We matter!" Each repetition reverberates against the walls, a powerful affirmation echoing their collective struggle. Logan, growing increasingly agitated, interjects, "This is ridiculous. You think they're going to believe a bunch of teenagers over an officer?" His voice is laced with contempt, dripping with condescension, but the churning energy from the students seems to chip away at his facade, exposing his fragile bravado. Chief Harris holds up a hand, her expression serious and unyielding. "Logan, this isn't about your position. This is about accountability. I need you to stand down." Her authority commands the room, and for a moment, silence hangs in the air, pregnant with anticipation. In that moment, the tension reaches a breaking point, the atmosphere thick with conflict. Logan's face contorts with fury as he realizes he's losing the battle, his confidence crumbling like a sandcastle against the tide. "You're siding with them?" he barks at the chief, disbelief etched across his features, his voice rising in pitch, a desperate attempt to regain control. "After everything I've done for this department?" Jada senses the moment of truth is near, the stakes higher than ever. "It's not about sides, it's about justice," she shouts, her voice rising above the din, each word resonating with her classmates. "We deserve to be heard." Her declaration ripples through the crowd, amplifying their solidarity. The students rally behind her, their collective voice echoing through the hall, a force of unity that sends ripples of energy coursing through the crowd. Hope blooms like wildflowers in a barren landscape. Yet in the midst of the emotional crescendo, Logan's expression hardens, his resolve faltering into something darker. He seems to snap, his anger boiling over as he lunges forward, hands raised as if to physically assert his authority once more. "Enough!" Chief Harris steps in front of Jada and Brooks, her body language commanding attention, radiating a fierce protectiveness. "You will not intimidate these students. If you can't handle your emotions, you need to step away." Her voice cuts through the tension, a clarion call against tyranny. Logan hesitates, clearly caught off guard by the sudden shift in the dynamics. A fleeting moment of uncertainty flickering across his face, but then he regains his footing, his voice low and dangerous, dripping with menace. "You have no idea what you're doing, Harris. They'll turn on you too." His warning hangs in the air, a shadow threatening to swallow the hope they've ignited. "Then let them," she replies, unflinching, the strength of her conviction unwavering. "Because I'm standing with them. It's time for a change, and I'm not going to let you bully them or anyone else." Her defiance galvanizes the students, their spirits lifting in response. The crowd erupts in cheers, the tension shifting once again as hope surges through them like a fresh breeze, invigorating their resolve. Jada feels a sense of relief wash over her, yet she knows they can't let their guard down. The battle for justice is far from over. Logan's face flushes with humiliation and rage, and in that moment, Jada sees the true colors of his character, the venom that has long bubbled beneath the surface. "You think this is over?" he snarls, stepping back and pointing an accusing finger at Jada, each word dripping with venom. "I will make sure you pay for this." The threat hangs in the air, heavy and oppressive, a chilling reminder of the stakes at play. "Try it," Marcus challenges, stepping up beside Jada, his fists clenched and ready for a fight. "You're not going to scare us anymore." His defiance mirrors Jada's resolve, solidifying their unity in the face of adversity. As Logan's threats linger, Jada takes a deep breath, steeling herself against the impending storm, her heart pounding like a war drum. She knows this moment will ripple beyond just the school, challenging systemic issues that have plagued their community for too long, demanding change that reverberates through time. "Chief Harris, we need to make sure this doesn't just get swept under the rug," Jada urges, her voice steady, each word an anchor of conviction. "This isn't just about today, it's about the future. We need to hold everyone accountable, including Logan." Her plea resonates with the gravity of their struggle, emphasizing the necessity for lasting change. Chief Harris nods, her expression resolute, eyes fierce with determination. "You're right, Jada. This is just the beginning. We'll need to launch an investigation, and I want your voices included in this process." Her commitment to the cause ignites a spark of hope in the hearts of the students, a promise that their fight will not be in vain. As the atmosphere thickens, Jada feels the intensity of the moment pressing down on her, an invisible weight settling on her shoulders like a heavy fog. She glances around, her heart racing as she takes in the faces of her classmates, some wide-eyed with fear, their brows furrowed in anxiety, while others stand fierce with defiance, eyes blazing with determination. Each expression tells a story of its own, a mixture of emotions swirling in the air, and she knows that all eyes are on her, waiting for her to speak, to take a stand, to be the voice that could either ignite hope or plunge them deeper into despair. The initial interaction between Jada and the officers was unceremonious, the kind of moment that would set the tone for everything to come. It had started with Logan's swaggering approach, the type that oozed authority but masked a deep-seated insecurity. "What's going on here?" he had barked, hands resting on his belt like a gunslinger ready for a showdown. His eyes narrowed as if searching for any sign of rebellion among them. Jada felt a knot form in her stomach, twisting tighter with every second. She had just been laughing with Brooks, discussing their plans for the weekend, their laughter a fragile barrier against the reality surrounding them. Then Logan had descended upon them like a hawk spotting prey, and the lightness of the moment evaporated. "Just talking," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady, though the tremor betrayed her anxiety, an involuntary crack in her facade. Logan's gaze hardened, the flicker of amusement replaced by disdain. "Talking? Is that what you call it? Because it looks to me like you're up to no good." His words dripped with contempt, the implication of wrongdoing hanging heavy in the air, weighing down her already fraying nerves. Her pulse quickened as a lump formed in her throat, the fear of the unknown coiling tightly around her. "We're just students. We didn't do anything wrong." The declaration felt small against the overwhelming authority he wielded, a truth that seemed to dissipate like smoke in the face of his aggression. The frustration boiling within her clashed violently with the fear of how this could escalate. In her mind, she replayed the countless instances when authority had been misused. Stories of friends unjustly profiled, of lives torn apart by a single, careless action. Her heart raced at the thought of becoming another statistic, another story of injustice swallowed by a system. "Just students?" Logan scoffed, stepping closer, invading her space with a predatory intensity, a tactic designed to intimidate. "You think that gives you a free pass? Maybe you're part of the problem." His words cut like glass, each syllable laced with condescension and disdain, aimed directly at her vulnerability. Jada felt the weight of his accusation pressed down like a vice. The anger surged within her, battling the fear that threatened to consume her. "You don't even know us," she shot back, her voice rising against the tide of his authority. "We're not the problem. You are." The defiance in her tone surprised even her, igniting a flicker of hope amidst the chaos. A murmur rippled through the small crowd that had gathered, drawn by the confrontation, their curiosity quickly morphing into solidarity. Marcus stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists, ready to back her up, the fire in his eyes reflecting the mounting outrage. "Back off, man. You can't just push people around because you're wearing a badge." His voice rang out, clear and strong, a rallying cry for the others. Logan turned his ire toward Marcus, his face reddening with indignation. "What did you say?" His voice dripped with incredulity, a challenge hanging in the air. "Don't think you can intimidate us," Marcus replied, his voice steady, though Jada could sense the tension simmering beneath his bravado, the adrenaline fueling their shared courage. "Intimidate? You think you know what intimidation is?" Logan retorted, voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're just a bunch of kids playing at being tough." His condescension wrapped around his words, a deliberate attempt to belittle them. "Playing at being tough?" Jada echoed incredulously, disbelief flooding her system. "You're the one acting like a bully. We're just trying to talk." Her voice rang out, breaking through the noise of rising tensions, a beacon of truth amidst the storm. Logan's nostrils flared, and the tension in the air thickened like a storm about to break, heavy and charged. Jada could see the anger swirling behind his eyes, a tempest brewing just beneath the surface, and a sense of dread washed over her. She realized that they were standing on the precipice of something dangerous, a line drawn between the authority of the badge and the innocence of youth. "I don't have time for your games," Logan snapped, raising his voice, each word a whip crack in the charged atmosphere. "You're wasting my time, and that's not going to end well for you." Jada's heart sank at the threat embedded in his words, but a swell of defiance rose within her, a voice calling her to stand firm. We're not going anywhere. If you want to talk, let's talk, like adults. The boldness of her statement hung in the air, a challenge echoing against the backdrop of their confrontation. But instead of bringing calm, her words only intensified the situation. Logan's jaw tightened, the muscles in his face shifting as he took a step closer, invading her personal space once more, his breath hot with aggression. You think you can talk to me like that? You have no idea who you're dealing with. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Jada shot back, her voice firm, even as her heart raced. A cop who thinks he can push people around without consequences. The truth of her words rang loud, a defiant stand against his tyranny. Consequences? Logan laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and mocking, reverberating in the heavy air. You think your little protest is going to change anything? You're just making it worse for yourselves. The derision in his voice was palpable, an attempt to undermine their resolve, but it only fueled her anger further. In that moment, the air crackled with unresolved tension, electric and oppressive. The crowd behind her was watching closely, a mix of fear and outrage palpable in their expressions. Jada could feel the energy shift. Their presence became a protective barrier, bolstering her courage, transforming her fear into a shared resolve. Enough, Officer Brooks finally interjected, stepping between them, his face pale with tension. Logan, you need to back off. This isn't helping. His voice trembled, but his intentions were clear. He was trying to diffuse the situation, though the storm of emotions was already raging. Logan scoffed, brushing Brooks aside dismissively. You're going to side with them? His disbelief was evident, and the disdain he held for his fellow officer hung heavily in the air like a storm cloud. This is why they think they can get away with anything. The sharpness of his words sent a jolt through the crowd, an electric current of disbelief mixed with anger. Jada could feel her pulse racing as Brooks's shoulders tensed, the conflict brewing between the officers now as volatile as the one brewing among the students. Let's just take a breath, Brooks tried to mediate, but his attempt fell flat in the growing storm, the tension palpable. Breath? You think that's what we need? You're all part of the problem, Logan shot back, venom in his voice, each word a sharp blade. The accusation hung in the air, a weight that threatened to suffocate the already fragile peace. What are you so afraid of? Jada challenged, her voice steady, echoing her mounting frustration. You're supposed to protect us, but you're just here to bully us into submission. Her words struck like lightning, igniting a spark of outrage in the crowd, amplifying the sense of unity in their shared struggle. The tension in the air crackled with remnants of the confrontation, but as the crowd began to disperse, a heavy silence settled over the scene, thick with anticipation. Jada stood at the center of it all, her heart still pounding from the adrenaline that coursed through her veins. She felt a mixture of relief and dread. The confrontation had escalated to a point she had never anticipated, leaving her exhilarated yet apprehensive. In the wake of the chaos, she could hear the murmurs of her classmates, their voices a blend of excitement and uncertainty, punctuated by occasional laughter that felt out of place in the charged atmosphere. Did you see that? We stood up to him, Marcus exclaimed, his eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and pride. The warmth of camaraderie briefly pushed back the unease, but Jada turned to him, anxiety creeping in. But what happens now, she replied, her voice a whisper, concern knotting her stomach. What if Logan decides to retaliate? As if on cue, the sound of sirens pierced through the aftermath, wailing like banshees in the distance, and Jada's stomach dropped. She turned to see multiple squad cars pulling into the parking lot, their lights flashing in a dizzying array of red and blue. The students exchanged nervous glances, some retreating instinctively, while others stood their ground, emboldened by their earlier confrontation and the solidarity they had built. Back up, Jada muttered under her breath, feeling a chill wash over her. She glanced at Brooks, who was still standing near Logan, his face a mix of frustration and concern, betraying the weight of the moment. The arrival of additional officers could either be a necessary intervention or a further escalation of the already tense situation. Logan's bravado faltered momentarily as he turned to the new arrivals, his expression shifting from defiance to irritation. "This is just a bunch of kids causing trouble," he spat, throwing a dismissive hand toward the students, who were now gathering nervously, shifting their weight from foot to foot, sensing the gravity of the moment. "Kids? They're not just kids, they're people," Brooks interjected, stepping closer to the new officers, his voice a mix of desperation and determination. "You have to listen to them. They're speaking out against what's wrong." His eyes searched the new officers for understanding, hoping to bridge the gap between the students and the very system meant to protect them. Jada felt a surge of gratitude toward Brooks for defending them, but the presence of the backup officers felt like a double-edged sword. She couldn't shake the feeling that the situation could spiral out of control again, the stakes escalating dangerously with each passing moment. "Step aside, Brooks," one of the new officers barked, a tall man with a hardened demeanor and a face that had seen too many confrontations. "We'll handle this." His tone left little room for negotiation, as if he were treating the students like a rabble to be dispersed rather than young people advocating for their rights. "Handle it?" Jada's voice rose, her heart racing again. "You mean intimidate us all over again? What do you think this will accomplish?" The words spilled out before she could stop them, fueled by the adrenaline still coursing through her. Logan shot her a venomous glare, his eyes narrowing as if he could physically impose his will upon her. "You're going to regret this," he warned, but the threat felt hollow compared to the chaos that surrounded them. The new officers exchanged glances, uncertain of how to proceed, their expressions a mix of confusion and caution. The crowd of students began to swell again, emboldened by Jada's words. "We're not backing down," someone shouted from the back, their voice cutting through the tension like a knife, and a chorus of agreement followed. Suddenly, one of the new officers stepped forward, her posture commanding and confident. "What's going on here?" she asked, her tone firm but cautious, as if she were attempting to regain control over an increasingly volatile situation. "I want everyone to take a step back. We need to assess the situation." "Assess the situation?" Jada couldn't help the incredulity in her voice. "You've already seen what's happening. We're standing up against abuse of power." Her frustration boiled over, desperation flaring in her chest as she sensed the moment slipping away. The officer raised her hands, signaling for calm, but the threat of what could happen loomed large. "I understand. We're here to ensure everyone's safety, but we need to keep the peace. Let's try to talk this through without further escalation." Her words hung in the air, but the moment felt fragile, ready to shatter with the slightest provocation. Just then, a voice crackled through a nearby radio, cutting through the noise like a hot knife through butter. "We have reports of a large gathering here. All units, prepare for crowd control." The starkness of the announcement sent a fresh wave of panic through Jada's chest. "Crowd control?" she echoed, disbelief flooding her senses. "We're not a riot. We're just students fighting for our rights." "Back off, all of you," Logan barked, pushing through the crowd toward the officers, his face now flushed with a mix of anger and desperation. "These kids need to be taught a lesson." Before Jada could respond, a sudden push from the back of the crowd sent her stumbling forward, colliding with Marcus, who steadied her with a firm grip. "What's happening?" he shouted over the commotion, eyes wide with fear and determination. The chaos began to escalate as the backup officers moved in closer, forming a line to separate the students from the police. Jada felt her breath quicken, the rush of adrenaline turning into panic as she sensed the shift in the atmosphere. The officers began to issue orders, their voices stern and unwavering. "Everyone step back. You're creating a disturbance." Jada's heart sank. The very essence of their peaceful protest was at risk of being shattered by the very people meant to protect them. She locked eyes with Brooks, who was watching the scene unfold with concern, desperation etched on his face. "Stay together," he shouted, trying to rally the students, his voice breaking through the rising tide of fear. "Don't let them intimidate you. We have the right to be here." His urgency was palpable, and it fueled Jada's resolve to stand firm. The students, fueled by anger and fear, pressed closer together, a tight-knit wall of solidarity against the advancing officers. Jada felt the warmth of their resolve bolster her, a collective pulse of determination coursing through the crowd. "Remember why we're here," she called out, her voice ringing clear above the chaos. "We won't be silenced." The weight of her words hung in the air, empowering those around her to stand tall. As the officers advanced, some students began to chant again, their unified voices rising in defiance. Justice! 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 The chant echoed through the parking lot, a resounding declaration of their determination. Jada felt a surge of hope. In the face of overwhelming odds, they were banding together, refusing to back down. But the new officer's voice cut through the chant, stern and unwavering. If you do not disperse, we will be forced to take action. The threat hung heavy in the air, and Jada felt the group waver for a moment, the fear palpable as the new officers shifted closer. The reality of their situation pressed down on her. What do we do, she thought, anxiety curling in her stomach. Stand firm, Marcus urged, gripping her shoulder tightly, his voice a lifeline. We can't give in now. Just then, Logan, sensing the tide turning, surged forward, his demeanor shifting from threatened to furious, eyes blazing with indignation. You think you're so brave? This is going to end badly for you. His words dripped with menace, but Jada saw the cracks forming in his facade. Look at him, she said loudly, gesturing toward Logan. He's the one who needs to be held accountable. Her heart raced, emboldened by the support of her peers. The crowd erupted into a chorus of agreement, their collective voice drowning out Logan's threats. But as the backup officers began to advance, the situation felt increasingly precarious. Jada's heart raced as she faced the reality of what could happen next. Would they stand their ground and face the consequences, or would they back down in the face of overwhelming force? In that moment, Jada knew they had come too far to turn back. The echoes of their chant filled her with determination, an unyielding spirit rising from within. They had already crossed a threshold, and there was no way they would retreat into silence again. The fight for justice had begun, and whatever chaos ensued next, they would face it together, united in their cause. In the days following the tumultuous confrontation, Jada felt the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders, each moment echoing with the charged energy of their protest. The cacophony of chanting students lingered in her mind, a constant reminder of their shared resolve and the urgency of their fight for justice. Determined to make a difference, she immersed herself in research, poring over articles about systemic racism, police accountability, and the history of civil rights movements. Each page she read felt like fuel to her fire, igniting a sense of urgency within her, a belief that change was not only necessary, but possible. At school, conversations buzzed among her peers like electricity, igniting a wave of activism. In the cafeteria, whispers of solidarity spread rapidly, fueling an atmosphere of determination. We can't let this go, Marcus insisted, his eyes ablaze with passion as he gestured animatedly. We need to keep pushing. If we don't stand up for ourselves, who will? Jada nodded, emboldened by his words. Together, they began to organize, rallying students to gather testimonies, documenting every account of racial profiling and mistreatment they could uncover. With each story they collected, they built a powerful narrative, a testament to the reality they faced. Meanwhile, the local law enforcement agency grappled with the fallout from the incident, facing mounting pressure from the community and advocacy groups demanding accountability. In a dimly lit conference room, officers convened, the atmosphere thick with tension and uncertainty about how to move forward. Logan's approach was reckless, Officer Brooks admitted, frustration etched on his face as he leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. This isn't just about us. It's about restoring trust with the community. We need to acknowledge what happened and address it head on. The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the implications of his words, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Agreed, another officer chimed in, leaning forward with a furrowed brow. There's been too much talk about policy changes, but not enough action. We have to hold ourselves accountable if we want to rebuild that trust. The sincerity in his voice reverberated in the room, creating an atmosphere ripe for change. As the discussion deepened, they debated the importance of training programs focused on bias awareness and de-escalation tactics, recognizing the need for improved communication with the community. We've got to reach out to the kids, Brooks emphasized, his voice firm yet compassionate. They're the future, and if we want to foster a positive relationship, we have to listen to them. We can't just write this off as another incident. His conviction hung in the air, a call to action that resonated deeply with the others. Back at school, Jada felt a surge of determination to channel her emotions into tangible action. She organized a town hall meeting, inviting community leaders, students, and even law enforcement representatives to discuss what had happened and how to prevent it in the future. The gymnasium buzzed with energy as people filed in, their faces a mosaic of curiosity and concern, the air thick with anticipation. Jada stood at the front, her heart pounding in her chest, but she felt ready, fueled by the support of her peers. As she addressed the crowd, her voice was steady, bolstered by the urgency of the moment. "We're here today because we believe in accountability and change," she proclaimed, her words resonating through the room. "What happened to us cannot be ignored. We deserve to feel safe in our own community." The room erupted in applause, a wave of support washing over her, invigorating her resolve and solidifying her belief in their cause. Throughout the meeting, stories poured out. Students shared their experiences with discrimination, recounting moments that had scarred them, while parents voiced their fears for their children's safety. Each testimony painted a vivid picture of the struggle for justice, and with each story, Jada felt her determination solidify further. They were not alone. Their voices were rising, intertwining to form a powerful chorus demanding change. After the meeting, Brooks approached Jada, a sense of urgency in his demeanor. "I want to help," he said, sincerity shining in his eyes. "I know it won't erase what happened, but if we can work together, we can start rebuilding trust." His offer was a lifeline, a bridge connecting the students' struggles with the law enforcement they had once feared. Jada felt a swell of hope. "We need you," she replied, her voice resolute, a spark igniting between them. "Together, we can hold Logan and the department accountable and push for the changes that need to happen." As the weeks unfolded, the conversations sparked by the incident began to ripple through the community. Protests gained momentum, advocacy groups rallied support, and discussions of police reform permeated local news broadcasts and social media feeds. Jada felt the impact of their collective effort. Each small victory fueled her passion further, and she was inspired by the growing movement surrounding her. With her eyes set on justice, she knew this was just the beginning. The fight would be long and arduous, but the determination shared by her peers and allies offered a beacon of hope. They were no longer passive bystanders in a broken system. They were catalysts for change, ready to confront the challenges ahead with courage and conviction. In her heart, Jada understood that true justice required not only resilience, but also the willingness to continue pushing for progress, even in the face of adversity. The struggle ahead would be demanding, but she was more than ready for the fight, fueled by a community that had rallied around her. With every step forward, Jada felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that their efforts were not just about one incident, but about creating a safer, more equitable world for everyone. As the weeks turned into months, Jada stood at the forefront of a movement that had grown far beyond her initial hopes. The gymnasium where they had first gathered had transformed into a hub of activism, hosting workshops, discussions, and planning sessions for future protests. Flyers adorned the walls, featuring powerful quotes from leaders of the civil rights movement alongside photographs of their own rallies, each image a testament to the resilience of a community unwilling to remain silent any longer. Jada felt a profound sense of purpose, driven by the belief that they were not just addressing a singular incident, but igniting a larger conversation about systemic racism and injustice that had festered for far too long. One evening, as she prepared for a panel discussion featuring community leaders and activists, she reflected on how far they had come. The fear that had once gripped her was replaced by a fierce determination, fueled by the stories of those around her. Each testimony collected, every voice raised in solidarity, wove together a narrative that challenged the status quo. Jada knew they were in the midst of a larger battle, one that would require unwavering commitment and resilience. The night of the panel, the auditorium buzzed with energy, filled with students, parents, and community members eager to engage in the dialogue. As Jada took her seat on the stage, she felt the weight of the moment settle over her. She scanned the crowd, noticing familiar faces. Friends who had stood with her through the storm, allies who had rallied behind their cause, and parents who had entrusted their children's safety to the movement they had sparked together. When it was her turn to speak, she rose, heart racing but steadied by purpose. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice steady. "We are at a pivotal moment in our history, one that demands action from each and every one of us. The fight against the systemic racism and injustice is not just a fight for the present, it is a fight for the future. It's a fight for the safety of our children and the dignity of our communities." She paused, letting her words resonate. "What happened to us was not an isolated incident. It is part of a pattern that has existed for generations. We cannot afford to ignore it any longer." The audience listened intently, a palpable sense of urgency filling the room. "We have to hold those in power accountable, not just in moments of crisis, but every single day. We must demand transparency and integrity from our law enforcement and institutions. Change is not something that will come to us. We must rise up and take it for ourselves." The applause that erupted was deafening, a wave of support washing over her. Jada continued, her resolve strengthening with each word. "But change is not just about protests or petitions. It's about education, community engagement, and forging connections. It's about understanding each other's stories and standing in solidarity, regardless of our backgrounds." She scanned the crowd, seeing nods of agreement and expressions of hope, the energy infectious. As the discussion continued, participants shared their ideas and commitments to action, each voice contributing to a tapestry of hope and determination. They discussed strategies for community engagement, plans for educational outreach in schools, and ways to ensure that their voices were heard at every level of local government. In the weeks that followed, Jada witnessed the fruits of their labor unfold before her eyes. School administrators began implementing programs focused on cultural awareness and sensitivity training for staff. Community leaders met regularly to discuss actionable plans to address the disparities that had long plagued their neighborhoods. The media began to pay attention, amplifying their stories and drawing in support from surrounding areas. But amid the progress, Jada also recognized the work was far from over. She remained vigilant, aware that moments of change could easily slip back into complacency if they did not continue to push forward. Each day presented new challenges, but Jada was no longer afraid. She had transformed her fear into fuel, a driving force that propelled her forward. As spring approached, the community prepared for a large march to commemorate their journey and honor those who had been lost to injustice. Jada stood at the front of the organizing committee, her heart swelling with pride and anticipation. The day of the march, they gathered in the park, banners flying, voices raised in a chorus of hope. As they set off, marching together, Jada felt the power of unity enveloping them. They were not just individuals fighting for change, they were a movement. Every step they took resonated with purpose, a declaration that they would no longer be silenced or overlooked. This is just the beginning, she thought, determination surging through her veins. As they reached the center of town, she took a moment to breathe, to absorb the magnitude of what they had accomplished together. The crowd had grown, and the atmosphere was electric with a shared commitment to justice. Jada stepped forward, raising her voice above the thrumming pulse of the crowd. "We stand here today not just for ourselves, but for every voice that has been silenced, for every life lost to systemic injustice. We are here to demand change, and we will not stop until we see it." The energy of the crowd surged, a wave of cheers and applause rising like a tide. In that moment, Jada felt the strength of their unity, a powerful reminder that they were capable of enacting real change. As the march concluded, Jada knew this fight would continue, evolving and growing as the movement did. She felt an unwavering commitment to keep pushing for accountability, justice, and equity. The path ahead was uncertain, but her heart was resolute, filled with the belief that their voices could spark a fire of change that would resonate far beyond their community. In the weeks and months that followed, Jada remained a beacon of hope, tirelessly advocating for justice and inspiring others to join the cause. She knew that the fight against systemic racism and injustice was a marathon, not a sprint. But she was ready to run alongside her community, determined to ensure that their stories would be heard and their calls for change would never fade into silence. As she looked to the future, Jada held tightly to the belief that together they could forge a path illuminated by empathy, understanding, and unwavering resolve. The fight was far from over, but she was more than ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that she was not alone in this journey. Together they would continue to rise, pushing back against injustice and crafting a brighter, more equitable future for all.